Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 13, Date and Doctrine of the Book of Formation. Book 3, Source and Authority of the Kabalah, from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah, by Arthur Edward Waite. Book 3, Source and Authority of the Kabalah. Argument. The two chief cycles of Kabbalistic literature, in spite of destructive criticism, are referable by their materials to Talmudic times. There is no reason why the Book of Formation should not be the work of our Akiba, as tradition affirms. There is no solid evidence to support the theory that our Moses de Leon wrote the Zohar at the end of the 13th century. At the same time, the belief of occult students that these works represent a tradition dating from an early period of history has also little to support it. The attempts to refer the Kabalah in a direct manner to some prior philosophical system must be largely set aside. It has its antecedents everywhere, but its analogies with other systems are referable to a natural similarity between independent conclusions on fundamental problems of being. Antecedent Jewish influence through the school of Aristobulus and Philo must not be overlooked, but also it must not be exaggerated. The Kabalah is sui generis. It has its scholastic connections and it has its Mohammedan correspondences. If there be any preponderance in a given direction, its sphere of influence has been Christian rather than Jewish. 1. Date and Doctrine of the Book of Formation. We are now in possession of the most important elements of Kabbalistic doctrine and the chief heads of its philosophical instruction. There is much, very much more in its literature, some of which must be set aside altogether from consideration in a work which would exceed its purpose if it entered into abstruse and technical matters, while some has been postponed till a later stage of our study because, although it is highly important to the right understanding of the subject, it does not involve the points with which we are concerned at the inception. First among these points is whether and how far we are warranted by evidence that can be produced in the open day in regarding the literature which contains the doctrines summarized by the preceding sections as possessing an authentic character, or the doctrines themselves as part of a tradition perpetuated in Israel from very early times. For this purpose, it will be convenient to accept the literature as divisible into four classes. 1. The Book of Formation. 2. The commentaries on that work which preceded the public appearance of the Zohar. 3. The Zohar itself. 4. The writings subsequent thereto. The report of an esoteric tradition in Israel did not begin to circulate through Christendom till the 14th century. And this, as we shall see later on, is explained by the fact that the chief collection of its archives was unknown, at least generally, in Jewry itself till about 1290 AD. This collection is that which is termed by Kabbalists the work of the chariot, in other words, the Zohar. The work of creation, that is, the Sefer Yetzirah, was known, as we have ground for believing, to at least one Christian student so far back as the middle of the 9th century, but there was no consequence attached to it for Christendom. The Sefer Yetzirah is supposed to embody a tradition handed down from the time of Abraham, and there is no doubt that the uncritical spirit of several centuries represented the patriarch as its author. This does not seem, however, as some modern criticism has loosely supposed, to have been the view universally adopted by the Jewish learning which accepted the document. That he received and he transmitted it was undoubtedly held, but the work itself does not pretend to have been reduced to writing till after the destruction of Jerusalem, and tradition has ascribed its formal authorship to Rabbi Akiba ben Joseph, the pupil of R. Joshua ben Chananja, who was himself the successor, as he was also once the opponent of Rabban Gamaliel. There is nothing flagrantly improbable in this attribution, though it reaches us late in history. Akiba was a mystic with whose notions the scheme of the Sefer Yetzirah was in complete accordance, and he is the reputed author of another work dealing with the mysteries of the Hebrew alphabet. In his interpretation of scripture, he followed and exaggerated the principles of Hillel the Great and Nahum of Giso. He promulgated, or at least gave the weight of his authority to, the doctrine that every sentence, word, and particle in the Bible had its use and meaning. His literary labors were also very great, for to him is attributed the arrangement and redaction of the Halakha. Subsequent generations were so impressed by his marvelous knowledge of divine things that he was asserted to have discovered much of which even Moses was ignorant, which, in the sense not intended, is indubitably true. If we admit the existence of a secret tradition in Israel, we shall not need to question that Akiba was initiated therein. If we admit the existence of the Sefer Yetzirah in the 2nd century, we can imagine no more probable author for that work. Nor is the date essentially disagreeable to a moderate criticism. It is merely unestablished for want of exact evidence, which begins only with the 9th century, when there is tolerable reason to infer that it was known by Saint Agobard. It is not possible from any internal testimony to fix the work as belonging to the later period, for obviously any book may be far older than the date of its first quotation. While the fact, if established, that it was known in France in or about the year 850 would create a presumption that it was in existence much earlier, for literature traveled slowly in those days. We must remember also that a Sefer Yetzirah is mentioned in both Talmuds in connection with the doctrine that heaven and earth were created by a mysterious combination of letters, and that Frank characterizes the attempt of modern scholarship to distinguish two works under an identical title as founded in gross ignorance. If, however, we do not place the work in Talmudic times, we may concede that it came into existence within a measurable distance of the stormy period in which the great Talmudic canons were forcibly closed. We have next to distinguish between the date which may be surmised for the treatise and that which must perhaps be attributed to the teaching embodied therein. Have we any ground for believing that the doctrine of the Sefer Yetzirah is older than the Egyptian captivity, as its legend affirms? This question must be answered by an emphatic negative. The doctrine under notice gives prominence to the sacred and divine character of the Hebrew alphabet, and we have no warrant for supposing that the art of writing was possessed by Abraham. Every probability is against it, and every authority is agreed on this point. But the Sefer Yetzirah contains, by implication at least, the doctrine of an occult power and sanctity inherent in certain divine names, and we know that this belief is very old in humanity, that it is found at an early period in Chaldea, Arcadia, and so forth. It is afflicting to modern intelligence, but it is of great antiquity, and as it belongs to those countries with which Israel was in contact, we have reason to think that it became part of the religious baggage of the Hebrew people long before the Sefer Yetzirah, the alphabet of Akiba, or the Mishnah itself were dreamed of. Occultism has attached itself to this doctrine, and we must allow, therefore, to occultists that the most ancient document of Kabbalism does embody something of tradition from the past, perhaps even from the period of the Babylonian captivity, as the Talmud itself indicates. On the other hand, we have no evidence to show that the doctrine of the instruments of creation is much prior to the date of the treatise which develops it. It has no history previously and can therefore be placed only in Talmudic, that is, in post-Christian times. It should be added that the Sefer Yetzirah is part of a considerable literature of an occult or mystical complexion covering the period between the closing of the Talmudic canon and the first report of the Zohar. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.